I stand in Winchester Cathedral in Hampshire, England, one of the largest cathedrals in Northern Europe. The oldest parts of the cathedral date to the Norman period in the 11th century, almost 1,000 years ago. The bones of Anglo-Saxon kings rest here in elaborate mortuary chests atop the walls of the cathedral's high altar. In the far rear of the cathedral, behind the choir, I pass through rows of elaborate sarcophagi upon which rest the sculptured effigies of those who lay below, some dressed in armor, another a shriveled skeleton that seems to beckon memento mori. The cathedral contains the graves of 1,000 years' worth of prominent residents, bishops, knights, lords, and philosophers. But it is a flat, ledger stone set into the floor near the front of the church that attracts the most attention. In fact, I had to wait for the crowd to pass before I could stand at the feet of Winchester Cathedral's most famous inhabitant, Jane Austen. As I wait, I read a sign nearby that praises her literary genius and laments that the gravestone, quote, gives no indication that she was one of the greatest English writers. Indeed, it says nothing about her writing, or Pride and Prejudice, or Mr. Darcy. It says nothing of the impact that Austen would leave on not just the English language, but on the global novel. Instead, it says so much more.
The benevolence of her heart, the sweetness of her temper, and the extraordinary endowments of her mind obtained the regard of all who knew her, and the warmest love of her intimate connections. Their grief is in proportion to their affection. They know their loss to be irreparable.
When I think about it, it's remarkable that Jane Austen has a stone here, among the bishops and kings and lords. When Jane Austen died, she was not considered one of the greatest English authors. She was admired in certain circles, to be sure, but her works had not been bestsellers, and her family, although respectable, had neither the money nor the status one might think required to be buried in such a grand place. She was, when she died, a spinster who had depended on her brothers financially for the last 12 years of her life. No, they did not bury Austen here because she was one of the greatest English authors. They did not use their connections and pay the heavy fees because they knew that Austen would leave a centuries-long impact on readers around the world. They did not do it for us. They did it for her. Their Jane Austen was not our Jane Austen. Their Jane Austen was the beloved aunt who would entertain her nieces and nephews with wild stories. Their Jane Austen was the one who practiced piano in her room, but only when no one was in the house to hear her. Their Jane Austen was the one who loved blue dresses but hated dress shopping and always mended her own clothing. Their Jane Austen was the one who would write stories when they were far away so they would always know that she was thinking of them. Their Jane Austen was not our Jane Austen. Around the gravestones are many more elaborate memorials to her, erected long after her death. There's a gleaming brass memorial plaque and a sculptured bust and a little exhibit about her life. But it is the gravestone that pulls me, because it is the gravestone that reminds me that Jane Austen was not a mythic figure. She was not a heroine from one of her novels. She was a real person, beloved by those who knew her. But who was that person? Beyond the grand memorials of her life in Winchester Cathedral, who was this enigmatic figure who rests at my feet? Who was this country girl with only the scrappings of a formal education? And how did she become this figure that we know today? How did a simple Hampshire girl find herself not only here at Winchester Cathedral, but on bookshelves around the world? Who was Jane Austen. No one who had ever seen Jane Austen in her infancy would have supposed her to become one of the most important novelists in the English language. Not even Jane Austen herself. But who was Jane Austen? The real Jane Austen. The historical Jane Austen. Who was the woman who launched 1,000 movie adaptations? What do we know about the inventor of Mr. Darcy and the progenitor of the enemies to lovers genre? Not much. 161 letters survive. That's it. A fraction of what Austen would have written in her lifetime. We don't even really know what Austen looked like. The famous image of Jane Austen, which appears on the British pound, came from one commissioned after her death. Her nephew based this portrait off an incomplete watercolor believed to have been made by her sister Cassandra. The original shows Austen with a frown and crossed arms, only half painted in. And there were other big questions that almost dominate her legacy. Why, for a woman who wrote so much about marriage, did she never marry? Did she base her characters off of real people that she knew? We don't know. So grab your reading glasses and dust off your textbooks. This is Finding Jane Austen, Episode 1, First Impressions. I'm your host, Dr. Anne Fertig. So, what do we know about Austen? She was known for her sharp wit, but that sharp wit could draw blood. She came from a highly literary family. Her mother wrote poetry. Her brothers started a newspaper while at Oxford. She had the option to marry. Once, she even accepted a proposal, but she took it back the next day. But there are a lot more maybes than definitelys when it comes to Austen. Austen had a brother who may have been deaf, and there was a reference in her letters to talking with her fingers. Did Austen know British Sign Language? And that newspaper her brother started? There's a mysterious letter in it from a writer signed as Sophia Sentiment. Could that have been Austen's first publication in print? And who was the mysterious gentleman Austen met at the seashore, who her family later said was the only man Austen would consider marrying? These are the questions we're exploring, and many more. Because in this podcast, we're finding Jane Austen. And we're looking for her in all of the familiar places. Her books, her letters, her surviving belongings. But we're also taking a journey into the less traveled paths of her life. We'll start with Austen's earliest years in rural Hampshire and trace her life all the way through her death at age 41. And then we'll go one step further. We'll uncover how Austen became not just the woman she was, but the cultural behemoth she is today, by looking at how we've shaped Austen's myth and stature over the last 200 years. What do you think of when you think of Jane Austen? Do you imagine a bonneted spinster nose deep in a book? Or do you see her in a ballroom, dispensing devastating quips to a female friend, while her eyes scan the room? Do you find her amongst nature, walking in the lush green English countryside as she invents stories in her head? The first step to writing any biography is to understand your subject. But Austen is elusive, even in her own letters. By her own family's description, she could be shy and vivacious, warm and withdrawn, silly, but also rigid.
She strikes me as a formidable enemy and someone whom I would not wish to hazard to invite to a dinner party, because on the way home in the carriage, she would undoubtedly criticize everything I was wearing, everything I made, everyone I invited, and all the decoration. And not in a kind of catty way either. I bet that she would have a few zingers that would hit home, and that is precisely why I would want to invite her. Not because she's catty, but because she would be on the nose. She is an extraordinary observer, and whatever Achilles' heel I had that night would surely be exposed to her wit. My name is Janine Barkis. I teach at the University of Texas at Austin, where I hold the Regents Council Centennial Professorship in the Book Arts.
Janine Barkas is just one of many Austen scholars we invited onto this series to help us find Jane Austen. Like me, Dr. Barkas is faced with the tremendous task of trying to write an Austen biography. So I asked her, what did she find the most challenging about this task?
Probably the greatest difficulty for any biographer is the hard fact that so many others have written strong biographies already, starting with her brother Henry's short account of his sister as a sort of reluctant and shy writer that attaches itself to Northumbrian persuasion in 1817. And then her nephew in 1870 puts his own Victorian spin on things. Since then, the perspectives of many other historians, biographers have sharpened our understanding of her life, just like facets add to the luster of a diamond, all these different perspectives, including Deirdre Lefay, John Halperin, Paula Byrne, Claire Tomalin, John Spence, and so many others. And of course, the films, the biopics. Each generation has reshaped Austen in their own image, from kind of devout Victorians, spinster to audacious female rebel. And I think that it's all the stuff that's already there that makes for the difficulty of writing something new, wanting to stay clear of what others have already covered and add to the conversation rather than to simply echo it.
That is indeed a big hurdle. The scholar's urge is to contribute to the field, to make us view Austen in a new light. But so much work has come before us that it is easy to fall into the trap of writing a biography like others have. The danger of this is that we are unconsciously shaped by what we've read before. The question always remains, do we see Austen in a way because that is how she was? Or do we see it because we inherit these ideas from the portrayals of her that have come before? Even fictional portrayals of Austen can shape the way we think of her as a historical figure. Is she a young, plucky heroine like Anne Hathaway in Becoming Jane? Or a middle-aged spinster grappling with the consequences of her own decisions, like in Miss Austen Regrets? The first biographies of Austen were all written by family members. The earliest biographical notice, which was prefaced to the publication of Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, is generally believed to have been written by her brother Henry. A few decades later, her nephew, James Edward Austen Leigh, wrote the first full-length biography. The Austen family controlled Austen's image for the first 100 years after her death. As historians, we're really indebted to the recollections and memoirs of their Aunt Jane. But as we will see throughout this series, not all of those memories are reliable. The family is also responsible for the destruction of Austen's letters. It should be clear, we're not 100% certain what happened to the letters, but family lore says that Cassandra, Jane's older sister, destroyed most of Austen's letters. Her niece Fanny is said to have destroyed the letters written to her father. This was not necessarily uncommon during this period. Relatives of famous people often destroyed their letters to prevent them from becoming public. They did this to protect the privacy of their celebrity relation, as well as to prevent embarrassment for the family. Mary Wollstonecraft, who had been well respected in her lifetime for her work of vindication of the rights of women, plummeted into infamy after her death, when her husband, William Godwin, published his memoir of her, which revealed that she had an illegitimate child many years before meeting him. Across the pond, Thomas Jefferson burned his wife's letters after she died. But this does leave quite a bit of mystery for our understanding of Jane Austen. Only 161 letters written by Austen survive. There are huge gaps of time in which we hear nothing from the author. No letters, for example, survive from before the year she turned 21. We have only a handful of belongings too. A pelisse, or cloak, a muslin shawl that may have been embroidered by her, a writing desk, family music books, and a book of riddles. No original manuscripts of her novels remain, although we do have the stories that she penned as a teenager.
Because there are so many lacuna and so many voids, we don't know anything about certain moments in her life. We don't know anything about her love life. We don't know anything about her ambition as a writer. And yet we read between the lines of the lists she made and the gestures that she makes and self-conscious gestures she makes in Northanger Abbey about other novels. She's simply a magician with the English language and has her finger on the pulse of human behavior. These stories are universal simply because every generation reinvents Austen in their own image, as it were. And that sense of possession, that sense of appropriation is what propels, I think, the celebrity of Austen. And I think Cassandra gave space for that by burning those letters, and in many ways have been a very clever thing to deny us certain specifics about Austen's life and instead allow a space where we can imagine as we wish, in the same way that we do for Shakespeare, who also didn't leave us with a lot of biographical facts or diary or anything like that.
Let's think about that for a minute. Every generation reinvents Austen in their own image. Whether you grew up in the era of 90s Austen adaptations, or you came to her in high school English class, a reader's relationship with any author, but especially Jane Austen, can be extremely personal. But why is this? Frances Burney and Maria Edgeworth wrote novels at the same time and were far more commercially successful. But outside of a university, almost no one reads them today. A 2018 macro analysis of over 3,500 authors pinpointed both Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott as the two most influential writers in the English language in terms of narrative and stylistic development. But I don't see many hit fan conventions of Sir Walter Scott's novels. And Austen's works have been endlessly adapted. We counted 447 novel and graphic novel adaptations of Austen since 2000. 447. And that was just the number where we gave up counting. When it comes to films and miniseries, you might know of the 2005 Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley, or the 1995 version with Colin Firth. But what about Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy? The Lizzie Bennet Diaries on YouTube? Or the 2022 queer romantic comedy Fire Island? Did you know what the most produced play in the United States was in 2018? It wasn't a Shakespeare play. It was Miss Bennet, Christmas at Pemberley, a spin-off featuring characters from Pride and Prejudice. And there have been increasingly diverse novel adaptations, such as Uzma Jalaluddin's Aisha at Last, Sayantani Dasgupta's Debating Darcy, or Ibby Zaboy's Pride, which is one of my favorite Austen adaptations. In fact, you may not even realize that you're a fan of Jane Austen. Do you love classic 1990s teen drama Clueless? That's an adaptation of Emma. What about Taiwanese blockbuster Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? Director Ang Lee described the film as, quote, Sense and Sensibility with martial arts. And if you watch Bridget Jones's Diary every single Christmas with your sisters like I do, well, that's a modern remake of Pride and Prejudice. Colin Firth even returns in the role of Mark Darcy. Austen saw none of this success during her lifetime. She was the epitome of critically acclaimed, but commercially middling. She had some pretty important fans. The Prince Regent himself was a fan of Pride and Prejudice, but his endorsement did little to boost sales. And the sad thing is, it only took 15 years after her death for her works to become the phenomenon that they are today. If you're a fan of Austen, you're in good company. Winston Churchill was a fan of Jane Austen. Joyce Carol Oates, Douglas Adams, Hank Green, and Stephenie Meyer are all modern creators who have cited Austen as an inspiration. And her influence goes back way further than that. Does the name Rudyard Kipling sound familiar to you? If it doesn't, perhaps this does. The Jungle Book. Well, in addition to his famous children's story, Kipling also wrote a short story called The Janeites. And it was about a society of World War I veterans who united over their love of Austen. Now, you might think it odd that men in the trenches of World War I were reading the polite courtship plots of Jane Austen, but actually, they were.
In the middle of the First World War, for British troops, it was a way of kind of reminding troops of why they were fighting.
Here is Katie Childs, chief executive of Chawton House, which was one of the homes of Austen's brother Edward, and now the home of the Center for the Study of Early Women's Writing.
It's a particularly grim part of the First World War, and morale is low. Conscription has come in, and there are ways by the War Office to try and remind troops that you're fighting for England, you're fighting for Britain, you're fighting then for the Empire. One of the things that they do is produce a number of sort of archetypal British novels or novelists. And so I think Dickens is included, Shakespeare's definitely included. So she was included within that. And I think it shows, to me, it just demonstrates she's become part of that group, that canon, that selection of the British writers, and is being sent to enthuse and remind soldiers why they were fighting.
Kipling did not invent the term Janeite, but his story helped popularize it. Today, devoted fans of Austen are known as Janeites. And in the 1940s, Janeites decided to organize.
So Jane Austen is unlike authors like the Brontes in the sense that there was not a fan society and a literary pilgrimage site for Austen right after her lifetime.
This is Juliet Wells, professor of literary studies at Goucher College.
Famously, the parsonage where the Bronte sisters lived became the Bronte Parsonage Museum, and there was a Bronte Society not too long after the sisters died. So literary tourists had a Bronte place to go. But Austen readers who wanted to walk in her footsteps, visit the house where she lived and wrote, had to do that on their own for a really long time. And in the 1940s, Jane Austen fans in the UK who would not have called themselves Jane Austen fans, my goodness, they would have called themselves devotees probably. But they got together and fundraised to acquire the house that Austen lived in and wrote in the last decade of her life, and to open that house as a museum. So the Jane Austen Society of the UK began with that mission, a mission related to a building and a museum. The house opened to visitors in 1949. And so for the first time, if you were a very, very dedicated literary tourist or literary pilgrim, you could officially go and enter the house where Jane Austen lived. North American Jane Austen fans were part of the British Jane Austen Society from the beginning. And in the 1970s, a few of those North American fans decided that it would be awfully fun to not have to go to England to be with fellow fans. And they also decided that as North Americans, they could have a new kind of society that would be more welcoming and more fun. And so 3 of those North Americans founded the Jane Austen Society of North America in 1979. And that is now the largest author society for Austen in the world.
And there's a lot more Jane Austen societies than you might think. There are Jane Austen societies in the United States and Canada, UK, Australia, Austria, Brazil, Chile, Japan, India, Pakistan, Mexico, Spain, and Argentina. But it doesn't answer the question of why Jane Austen remained so relevant when other British authors fell by the wayside. What is even more curious is the way that Austen has gained global prominence. She is considered a core part of the British literary canon, but she has also been claimed by communities across the world. There are a couple of factors at play here. A big one is colonialism. Austen was born into a world of empires. At the time of her birth, much of the world was controlled by a handful of European countries. Most people associate Austen with a time period known as the Regency. You might recognize it by its free-flowing empire waist dresses, calf-length breeches, and general cottagecore vibe. But Austen wasn't born in the Regency era. She was born in the Georgian period that preceded it. When Austen came into the world, George III was King of Great Britain. You might recognize him as Mad King George, or the one that had that really catchy song in Hamilton. Thus, Austen was actually born in the Georgian era, aka the 18th century, when all the kings were Georges. It wasn't until 1811, when George III's mental illness incapacitated him for the rest of his life, that the Regency Act made his son, also named George, his regent. The actual regency then only lasted for 9 years, until King George III died in 1820, and Prince Regent became George IV. The Georgian period was a time of great territorial expansion for the British Empire. In 1775, Britain was actively colonizing the Americas, Australia, South Asia, and parts of Africa. But the empire was also fracturing. The American Revolution would last for 8 years, ending in a victory for the United States of America. Other revolutions quickly followed. The French Revolution shocked Europe with its violence and toppling of aristocracy and monarchy. The Haitian Revolution, which took place from 1791 to 1804, created the first modern nation to be established by its formerly enslaved inhabitants. The Austen family may seem insulated from these global events in rural Hampshire, England. But Austen's family traveled the world. They had deep links with colonial efforts in both India and the Caribbean. There is some evidence that her father may have benefited from the opium trade, and relatives of hers profited from the slave trade. 3 of her brothers, meanwhile, would go on to support abolition. 2 of her brothers would join the British Navy and fight in the Napoleonic Wars. The husband of her cousin Eliza would lose his head in the French Revolution. We don't know much about Austen's own feelings about these world events, but whether she liked it or not, after her death, her books became a tool of empire. Once Austen was firmly ensconced within the British canon, British colonization efforts taught the works of Austen and other British authors as a way to assimilate their colonies and to forcibly entrench British cultural hegemony around the world.
How Austen was first read in the British Empire is not perhaps such a happy story, and has more to do with cultural hegemony, as we might call it. Young children being schooled in British literature because Britain was the colonizing country or the ruling country. And even after countries like India and Pakistan earned their independence, the influence of British culture remained strong and remains strong.
But something happened with Austen that did not happen with Dickens or Shakespeare. Austen began to be reclaimed by colonial subjects.
What's different today is that readers around the globe, regardless of the colonial histories of their nations, are claiming Austen for themselves. Many readers, especially women readers in India and Pakistan, are proclaiming that they read Austen not because of any allegiance to British culture, but because Austen describes the lives of women who are having to navigate power, much as women do today in many parts of the world. Austen's England is a patriarchy, and there are patriarchal cultures still out there in lots of places. And Austen shows how one strategically navigates living in patriarchy as a woman.
There are several Indian film adaptations of her novels. Bride and Prejudice is the most famous, but there are others, like the Tamil language Sense and Sensibility adaptation Kendu Kandane, starring international superstar Aishwarya Rai, and Aisha, a charming modern rom-com adaptation of Emma. But even in places outside of the British Empire, Austen has had a special place. She was brought first to Japan by Natsume Soseki, who is known as the father of modern Japanese literature. Natsume was sent by the Japanese government to study English literature in London. He infamously hated his time in Britain, but he found one thing he did love: Jane Austen. It was actually a student of his that eventually translated Austen into Japanese. Today you can find Austen in J-dramas, manga, and Japanese musical theater. The list goes on and on. I could spend a whole episode talking about the ways in which Austen has been adopted by fans worldwide. But we're still left with the question of why? Dr. Wells provided one answer. The broad strokes of Austen's world and conflicts are remarkably relatable, especially to women who find themselves confined by social expectations or who struggle to achieve financial independence or social mobility within their own communities. Her novels also center around family conflict, social pressures, and financial insecurity, which are extremely relatable. All of Austen's heroines are different, but they live in the same world, a world controlled by men and money. Austen herself had no control over her financial future. She was dependent for many years on the generosity of her brothers, who didn't always come through for her. There were moments of great humiliation, and she felt a deep pressure to marry, so much so that she once accepted a proposal on the spot, only to take it back the next day. And there are certain events in Austen's life that veer very close to the events depicted in her novels. So maybe we haven't yet pinned down what it is about Austen that makes her so appealing. But one thing is for certain, she must have been a pretty remarkable person to write such broadly appealing novels. And that's why we're finding her. That's why we're diving into her life and history to find out what it is about her that has withstood the test of time. We'll look at her letters, her belongings, her family, even the ruins of the house where she once lived. We'll unpack what it meant to be a woman writer in Regency England. Heck, we'll even scour her 6 novels for clues. And if you haven't read these novels, don't worry. We're going to break them down piece by piece so that we understand every reference. And we're not only including her famous 6 novels in this podcast, but her teenage writings and her unpublished work too. So even if you're already a huge fan of Austen, together we'll uncover a world that's so much bigger. But if we're going to do this, we want you to participate too. Because Jane Austen is everywhere, and her stories belong to everyone. We invite you to contribute to our podcast. You can start by going to revolutionaryhistories.com/voicemail to send us a voicemail or to write us a note. Tell us your answer to the question, why Jane Austen? Is there a reason you're drawn to her, or a reason why you're listening to this podcast? What Austen mysteries do you want solved? Leave us a voicemail or write us a note at revolutionaryhistories.com/voicemail, and we may include your response in a future episode. Next time on Finding Jane Austen, we're starting at the very beginning in the remote village of Steventon, England, where, on a snowy day in 1775, our heroine, Jane Austen, was born. Along the way, we'll tackle our very first Austen history mystery. Thanks for listening to Finding Jane Austen. If you liked today's episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It helps us spread the love of Austen. Finding Jane Austen is a joint production of Revolutionary Histories and Primary Source Media. This series is researched and written by me, Dr. Anne Fertig. My executive producers are Jeanette Patrick and Jim Ambuske. Our thanks to our scholars, Juliet Wells, Janine Barkas, and Katie Childs, for their contributions to this episode, and to our voice actor, Grace Mallon. Special thanks also to Alexandra Miller for finding all 400 plus of those Jane Austen adaptations, and to George Mason University. Subscribe to Finding Jane Austen on your favorite podcast app. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.